Here's some examples of some rational equations. And these are kind of out of a review sheet I gave you. So let's take a look at number 28 on that sheet. And we have 3 over x minus 1 plus 2 over x equals 4. So we've got fractions which we really don't like. And the way we can remove those fractions is by multiplying every term or both sides of the equation, and each term, that is, by the least common denominator of all the denominators we see. So this is actually 4, but I just put it over 1 because it's the same thing. And in order to find the LCD, we have to construct it from the denominators we have. That's going to be factors. So I need an x, and I need an x minus 1, and of course a 1, but that's in there. So this is my least common denominator. And you can see that x minus 1 fits in there, and x fits in there, or divides in there. So we're going to multiply each term by this least common denominator. So I'm going to multiply 3 times x minus 1, 2 x times x minus 1, and 4 x times x minus 1. When we do that, that's going to kind of clear the fractions. It's going to make it a lot easier to solve. So x minus 1 over x minus 1 becomes 1, so I have 3x left. And then x over x is 1, so that kind of, we say cancels out, but just becomes 1, and then we have 2 times x minus 1. And then if we multiply this out, we're going to have 4x times x minus 1. And no more fractions. So now we have a nice equation to solve, although it's not so nice. Let's get to work on this. So we remove the parentheses, so we got 3x plus 2x minus 2, distribute, equals, and if we multiply 4x times x, I get 4x squared, minus, and 4x times 1 is 4x. Now I notice I have a quadratic equation. There's no x's over here to cancel, well, to divide out or subtract out from this or change it. So we're going to be stuck with a quadratic equation, so we have to set it equal to 0 and factor. We can first of all add these. 3x plus 2x is 5x. So what I could do is I could subtract 5x from both sides. So if I subtract 5x from this side and 5x from that side, that's going to make this 0. And then I could also add 2 to both sides. So I can do this in one step. 3x plus 2x is 5x. 5x minus 5x is 0. And negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So I just have 0 on the left. And that equals 4x squared minus 9x plus 2. So this is my quadratic equation. I want to solve it. So we usually try to factor and set each factor equal to 0. We can always set it equal to 0 like this and think of it as being on the left side. So how are we going to factor this? Well, it's what we call a general trinomial because we've got a number in front, so we're going to have to use our little 4-term grouping method once we determine what numbers we're going to use to rewrite the middle term. So remember what we do is we multiply the first term times the third term. So 4 times 2, and that equals 8. So we need two numbers that add up to give this middle number, negative 9, but multiply to give 8. And that's a positive 8. So since they multiply to give a positive, the signs are going to be the same. And since they added to be a negative, they're both going to be negative. So we can put our negative in here and here. And two numbers that multiply to give 8 would be 8 and 1, and if I add 8 and 1, I get negative 9, so those are my numbers. Negative 8 and negative 1. If I add those, I get negative 9, and negative 8 and negative 1. If I multiply them, I get positive 8, so that satisfies the conditions. So now what I do is I'll rewrite that middle term. I'll work a little bit more on the left over here. And I'll write 4x squared, and instead of writing negative 9x, I'm going to write negative 8x and negative 1x. Now that's the same thing as negative 9, so I'm just rewriting this in a more convenient fashion, plus 2. Now remember that's a quadratic, so it's still equal to 0. So now we're going to use our 4-term grouping method. Group it down the middle. And what can I factor out of these two terms? I can factor out a 4x, so I'll take that out. And what's left? X minus 2. If I take a 4x out of x squared, I've got x. If I take a 4 out of 8, I get 2 and an x. I just get the 2. And out of these two terms, we always factor out the leading sign, so I'm going to factor out a negative 1. And what's left is x minus 2. Again, this is still equal to 0 because it's a quadratic. And then we'll factor out the x minus 2. And what's left is 4x minus 1. And we know that's equal to 0. So if two things multiply to give 0, if a times b equals 0, remember if a times b equals 0, either a equals 0 or b equals 0. So we could say that either x minus 2 equals 0 or 4x minus 1 equals 0. So now we have two little equations, and we have to solve those. Well, if I add 2 to both sides, I get x equals 2. If I add 1 to both sides, I get 4x equals 1. If I divide by 4, x equals 1/4. So these are my two solutions. And you can go ahead and check these. I already checked these and put them back in, and they both work. So my solutions are 2 and 1/4. And sometimes I can write a solution set is going to be 1/4, 1 over 4, or 2, and that's the solution set. Either one of those numbers will work. So it was a pretty tricky problem because we had to go back and review our quadratic equations. We had to review general trinomials, and then we had to multiply both sides by the LCD. So there's a lot going on. So it's a good problem to really study and make sure you thoroughly understand because there's a lot of good techniques in here that you need to know as a good algebra student.